what I really want to bring up is the issue of the people who are supposed to be protecting us from pesticides, the regulatory authorities. And they actually avoid the gold standard in science, which is independent peer-reviewed research published in reputable journals. They totally ignore it, and their decisions are based on unpublished industry, pesticide industry, commercial in confidence studies. They're hidden from us. We cannot get access to them. Now, the US EPA says Roundup does not cause cancer. So their studies show that it doesn't. But we cannot get these studies. They won't release them. But the gold standard in science shows that it does cause cancer. The other problem is what we call a revolving door. Pesticide industry managers get jobs in organizations like the EPA, and they get to approve their previous employers' products. And then managers from the EPA, for instance, suddenly become vice presidents of Monsanto and other pesticide companies, and get these really good salaries. The other thing is that the groups that do the approving, when we can find out who they are, it's mostly hidden from us. But when we do find out, we find out that the majority of them have financial conflicts of interest. They actually get income from the pesticide companies, from the companies whose products they are approving. And this is known as regulatory capture, where the regulator protects the industry instead of protecting the public. I'll use another word. It's called corruption. These people are paid to protect us, and they're not doing their job. They are stealing public money, taxpayers' money. They should be jailed for it. So what I want to end on now is, for me, what is really important is our children and what pesticides are doing to them. The special requirements of the fetus, the unborn, the newborn, growing child, this is ignored. And here I'm going to talk about what's called developmental neurotoxicity. The other thing I could talk about is how the endocrine disrupting chemicals, the hormone disrupting chemicals, seriously interfere with their development at these ages. But we'll just talk about one issue, because we don't have all day to talk about all the issues that affect children. But the real issue here is that there is no specific testing in the regulatory approval process for these age groups. But independent testing shows that these are the most vulnerable. The fetus, the newborn, growing children do not have the protective liver enzymes that we have as adults. Their bodies cannot break down pesticide residues. We can to a degree, they can't. So the peer-reviewed science from the independent scientists show that they are particularly vulnerable to the smallest residues. And these residues cross the placental barrier from mom to the growing fetus. What the independent science shows us is that pesticide exposure in the fetus and developing children causes lower IQs, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, autism spectrum, organ damage, kidney, liver, lungs, reproductive tract, etc., autoimmune diseases such as asthma, lack of physical coordination, loss of temper, anger management issues, bipolar, schizophrenia spectrum, depression and childhood suicide, and also through endocrine disruption, childhood obesity. So I'll give you some examples of this. And this is actually from a peer-reviewed published paper that I'm a co-author along with Dr. Nancy Swanson and others. And we looked at a whole range of diseases in the USA and plotted them. These are diseases that have increased rapidly. And what we did is we plotted them against the increase in the use of glyphosate, which is Roundup. And what you can see here is that you go from a point in the 1990s where, in this case, it's autism. There's hardly any autism, and then it just shoots up, and it's still shooting up. And that's the yellow bars, that's the autism. The red line is the Roundup. And you see they track really nicely. And what, in science, will say that correlation does not equal causation. The sale of cell phones in Finland could track the same way, and there'd be no relationship between cell phone sales in Finland and autism in the United States. However, we have a few tools that we can use to look at causation, and one is the probability that they are linked. And there's a statistical tool called a Pearson's correlation coefficient. You don't have to repeat that or remember that. But essentially, the number there shows that if they were an accident, if they weren't linked, that'd be a 1 in 10,000 chance. So this is huge correlation showing that they are linked. After we published that, we actually got the science to show why they are linked. The brain is our biggest collection of nerve cells. And here's a very good scientific paper showing how glyphosate damages the development of nerve cells. And actually, this paper actually shows the mechanisms, the biological mechanisms, how it does it. And if you have a look at the top, and the control is the normal, no glyphosate, no Roundup. And the next one is the glyphosate. And what you can see here is that the control has this, you can see this long line coming out. That's called an axon. That's what it uses essentially to join to other cells. And the glyphosate one doesn't have an axon yet. Then you look at the second division and you can see the axon. It's got lots of branches. The more branches that they have, the more other nerve cells they can build to build what's called a neural network in the brain. And you can see that the Roundup one is just starting to build this axon. And then when we look at the final one, you can see the difference between them, that the nerve cell of the glyphosate is hardly developed, is hardly making the connections. So what we're seeing is brains where all of the nerve cells are supposed to make the connections for it to work properly aren't doing it. The issue here is that this effect is non-reversible. The good news is that we know now, and is that brains can build new networks. If we stop the exposure to glyphosate and put these children on healthy diets, they can start building new networks and recover from autism. There's some really good examples of that. The other issue I want to talk about are cancers. And one of the best studies put out was the US President's Cancer Panel, by the US President's Cancer Panel in 2010, showed that 80% of cancers are actually caused by environmental toxins, especially chemicals and pesticides. This is actually very good news, because what it means is that we could end 80% of cancers tomorrow by stopping these environmental exposures, and then use our science on the 20%. Cancer could actually be over very, very quickly, but it's been ignored. But what we're seeing instead is that cancer rates are rising all around the world now, especially in children. they continue to increase. This is the International Agency for Research in Cancer showing that the 13% increase in childhood cancers. I can give you other figures for adult cancers as well, showing cancers are still increasing. So this is another graph from the paper that Nancy Swanson and I published, and in this case we looked at thyroid cancer and Roundup. And if you have a look, going back to 1975, thyroid cancers were going up and down, but not really doing much. And the green line shows what the trend line would be if it had stayed that way. The red line, of course, is the increase in the use of glyphosate. In this one, we've included a blue line, which is the increase in genetically modified soy and corn crops, because essentially it's the increase in these Roundup ready crops that has increased the amount of Roundup that has been used. And once again, this tracks very well. It's a 1 in 10,000 chance that they are not related. In other words, very, very strong probability that Roundup is the cause of this increase in thyroid cancer.